This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio for this episode of the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast, and joining me is Matt Cole of Fatheads. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thank you so much for having us, Jamie. We are so excited to be here.
I'm excited to be here. I've been trying to make this podcast happen for the better part of a year, and then of course some schedule stuff happened in the last minute, and pulled together a trip in 2 weeks, and here I am on a Sunday afternoon at the brewery in Middleburg Heights and outside of Cleveland, and talking to the creator of Headhunter, one of our 2023 Craft Beer and Brewing Beers of the Year. I think it also, a perennial medal winner, just crushes it across so many styles, hoppy, German style, wheat beers, you name it. Matt and Fatheads just, they crush it across that. So many medals that I can't recount them all. There's a whole wall full of the World Beer Cup and GABF medals behind me right now that tell that story of excellence. But I don't even need to say that, because you can just say Fatheads, and I think people just, like brewers out there, they just know, I don't need to tell the story. You can tell the story. It's a great one. Anyway, through the course of this episode, we're going to talk about the Fatheads approach to hoppy beers. Recently, in our IPA issue this year, Joe wrote a great story about the evolution of American IPA. And of course, Matt was quoted in that story. Headhunter is certainly just a primary example of what that evolution of American IPA is. You make American IPA and you make West Coast IPA, and you distinguish between the two of those things. And I think having that conversation, and oh man, the cans are getting open, they're getting poured. I can't wait to taste all of these things. We're gonna talk about some of those distinctions, this evolution of American IPA as well as West Coast IPA. We'll probably talk about some of the other kind of hoppy, crazy beers, like the double red hop forward ale that we tasted out of the tank earlier here. And I know we're going to talk about some German style beers in there, probably weissbier, and because that's something that Matt's passionate about, even if it's not the most popular style out there in the commercial landscape now. Matt's you're a real German brewing nerd. A passionate fan of German brewing. Anyway, we'll talk about all those things, but first, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer, but don't just take my word for it.
Hey, this is Josh Erickson of Jafuncta Brewing in Mandeville, Louisiana. The team at G&D were a critical part of our 10X expansion, always just a phone call or email away. And thanks to their superior equipment, technology, and documentation, commissioning our new chiller was smooth and straightforward. Now we can't wait until we need to upgrade our existing chiller.
That's right. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. You've got a G&D chiller outside, man. I saw it as I drove up here today.
A couple of them, actually.
A couple of them.
Yeah.
All right.
One's pretty big.
Yeah.
And it's getting too small.
Oh, no. Uh-oh.
That's all good.
Awesome. And ProBrew is excited to now offer 2 to 4 week lead times on all in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers and seamers. These models are available in 100 to 300 can per minute filling speeds and are built with a focus on scalability and low dissolved oxygen pickup. This special lead time is only while supplies last, so send them an email at contactus@probrew.com or call them at 262-278-4945. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, Old Orchard has supplied flavored craft juice concentrate blends to over 46 states for the production of fruit-forward beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, and more. By partnering with some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape, Old Orchard has become a go-to source of fruit-forward ingredients. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Matt. We start off the podcast with a little bit of background. As we were touring around the brewery before we started this, you mentioned that a lot of these core beers that you make were your home brews. And here they are.
Maybe not home brews. They were the first, those are the first batches of beer that we made in our brew pub.
Wow.
In North Olmsted in 2009. So those were actually core brands for our restaurant 15 years ago that have gone on to be core brands.
And here they
from
are.
a production standpoint. Right. Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling in a lot of ways.
Well, tell me the Fathead story.
Well, we tried to open up a little brew pub in North Olmsted where our original location is, and then I reached out to a friend of mine who had Fatheads looking to invest some money in the Pittsburgh market, and then kind of put our heads together, and then ultimately it became a Fatheads at that location. And then, in 2009, I think our first year, we sent some beer to the Bistro IPA Festival and in a suitcase, and it won a gold medal. So just like that, our brand was kind of on fire. And then it went on and won 2010 GABF, 2011 GABF, World Beer Cup 12, and World Cup Beer Cup 14. So we were we had this beer that we thought was super powerful as far as like representing the style and really standing out in a tough crowd. And a lot of that I can contribute to a lot of guys in Northern California kind of helping us navigate through all those challenges of dry hopping and oils and all that kind of stuff. So it really was a beer that I think as we sit here right now,
here you're this guy in Ohio that's like, had just made some friends with brewers who were helping, and then you go and just take all the medals away.
Well, I don't know if it was that, but I definitely picked a lot of pockets and slept on some couches and ultimately learned a lot about what was making their beers a little different, and even back then it was there was Tetra and things that were they were pushing it a little harder. And I brought some of that back, and I think a big part of it too was everybody wanted to filter their IPAs, hard, and fining seemed to be the best way to retain the natural characteristics of the beer. So it was just really a more of using a little bit of clarifiers so we didn't strip out all the body and mouthfeel and bitterness and aroma. And so that became something that I thought was a valuable tool, was more fining and not filtering. And to this, up until about 4 or 5 years ago, we still tried to find beer, and then we got a centrifuge, and life got a lot better actually. So we didn't open up this brewery, production brewery, with the centrifuge. We actually tried to find beer, and in hindsight, it was a terrible idea.
Yeah, this kind of scale, sure.
It was a terrible idea. But so anyway, a lot of influences from Northern California and a lot of those guys that just were knocking it out of the park. And I was just soaking up knowledge and, So
it started as this kind of small brew pub extension of Fatheads. And then the beer that you made kind of became Fatheads. It kind of it was, then ultimately the things just became synonymous. And now this is what people think of when they think of a Fatheads.
Maybe, but it's evolved so much. I mean, a lot of the inspiration came from Green Flash, West Coast, but it was 90 IBUs, and it was a little heavier on the malt, and so back in 2012 and 13 and 14, it was like smash it as hard as you could and try to find a way to fit body in to balance out the rest of this abrasive bitterness. So, it had, medium crystal malts and maris otter and all these things in there that were trying to take the edge off. And today's world has definitely changed, so
we've gotten so much better at kind of honing and shaping.
Finesse. Yeah.
But I remember those days. I remember that first time I had Green Flash West Coast IPA. It was probably 2009 or 10, somewhere in there. Yeah. And I was in Pennsylvania, and I bought it at Wegmans of all places. Yeah. And I mean, that was it was this beer that I just never tasted anything like that before. And set a light off. And of course now went down that whole hop rabbit hole. and have continued to evolve along with everybody else along that. But what I think is interesting is that with Headhunter in particular, you ride that line as an American IPA that also has a lot of that that lightness, and also is kind of finding ways to both build. It's not as as tight and lean and austere as some of the West Coast IPA is nowadays, but it also is not it's not reddish and ruddy or sweet or in any way it captures this idea of American IPA of being full and round enough without being flabby. Anyway, it's so beautifully structured. I can't wait to kind of, talk to you about that kind of stuff. But let's talk about the bigger kind of approach to, like brewing philosophy that you have around Fatheads, because hoppy beers play a big part in that. That's probably the bulk of what you do. But you also have a serious love affair, with German beer styles, and have focused a lot on that too.
We definitely have a focus on German beer styles. Unfortunately, it's definitely not a core, part of our portfolio.
Labor of love.
Yeah, well, no, it's definitely a labor of love. And Weizen beers are definitely a labor of love for us. But what pays the bills are our hop forward beers, and we work really hard to try to drive the aromas and the oils and all those characteristics in our hop forward beers, and hop selection and all those things are like a really big part of what we do. So unfortunately I don't get to brew all the beer that I love to brew on a daily basis as far as lagers and other things. But as a whole, we are known for hoppy beers, and we drive our hop. We manipulate hops to the 10th degree as far as trying to get the most out of them, and trying to be a little bit more cutting edge, and trying to be something that is going to be impactful for the consumer.
Sure. Now, as I'm thinking about it too, I mean, I know we've talked about you in the past. I know I talked to you talked with Mike Hunsacker, who's now Grains of Wrath. He worked here for a while and claims that he was a student in the Matt Cole School of Brewing and learned so much from brewing for you. And of course, the Matt Cole acolytes are out there in the brewing world, and the folks that got to work for you and pick your brain and have gone on to, of course, do awesome things themselves. Let's kick off the conversation, talking about IPA and this kind of evolution of American IPA. Before we do that, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. It's perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. And RSS Macklin, a family-owned company started by the head of seaming technology from PS Angeles and SME, and a field service technician for Ball Corp, offers audits and repairs for can seamers and can integrity training. With experience from big breweries, they bring valuable knowledge to craft businesses. They provide solutions for can damage, seam training, and help your facility become self-sufficient without relying on original equipment manufacturers. If you have any questions regarding your machine setup, parameters, or concerns about your can line, call them at 330-299-8210 or email them at service@rssmacklin.com. That's RSSMACLIN.com. And if you're a brewery or distillery in planning or interested in adding a brewery or distillery to your existing craft beverage business, visit breweryworkshop.com now. Secure your spot in our upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September in Fort Collins, Colorado. Opening or purchasing a brewery or distillery today is rife with challenges, and the things you don't know that you don't know could be the difference between failure and success. Invest in the success of your business with this 4-day intensive filled with panel discussions, small group sessions, technical tours, and more. Learn more at breweryworkshop.com. So Headhunter is a beer you brewed for a long time now. Maybe we track back and talk about some of that evolution of it, because most great brewers are constantly having to evolve beers because you want them to hit the same. You don't want them to hit different, but everyone's context always changes, right? You know, the food we're eating, the taste we have, the ingredients where they are now versus, I mean, you know, hop kilning temperatures now are a lot different than those hop kilning temperatures were 15 years ago as you start this kind of thing. You know, the malt that you're using now is going to be different. You know, it's not going to be exactly the same as it was back then. The whole technology side of beer ingredients has also gotten more developed, better. And so, you know, those things have to adjust along with it. While at the same time, our palates adjust and change. And, you know, we're not in that, hey, hit me with 90 IBUs and like, you know, wreck my palate kind of era of beer anymore. So, you know, when you think about Headhunter, like what is the beer? Like, it's not a recipe, is it? Maybe part of it's the recipe, but part of it's how you want it to be perceived. How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, obviously hops are an agricultural product and they vary so much from year to year, and it evolves every year, even to this day, you know, meaning like a prime example is like, I wasn't really a big fan of Chinook last year. It definitely didn't seem to have the impact, the pine, the grapefruit, you know, and I've read some things that maybe that it didn't quite have the same impactful, you know, characteristics. So, you know, with Headhunter, we buy from a couple different hop brokers that gives us a little flexibility, so we can say, okay, this is a little bit more impactful for aroma. This one's a little bit more impactful for the kettle. You know, how can we kind of like manipulate that around to ultimately get the best out of what we have? So, you know, we get flexibility and things like that. So, I really do believe that it every year, we can pull stuff out, we can put stuff in. The consumer really doesn't know the difference.
Tell me about that process. You know, I'm curious about that. And
well, it's definitely challenging, and it's definitely one of those things that, you know, what we select and then ultimately what gets pelletized and processed, and, you know, then it becomes a whole different evaluation process for us after the fact that we've already gone through and selected this and that and this lot. And, you know, so we ultimately bring it all in and kind of look at it from, you know, a non-biased approach. And we always, you know, don't really, you know, I don't want to know who grew this or who did this, and we just throw it all out there. You know, this is, you know, Chinook, and there's 5 different lots, and we just let our nose kind of take it where it needs to go. And sometimes we've contracted for stuff that maybe, you know, maybe isn't the best, the best bang for the buck. So what are we going to do? You know, are we going to, you know, pull that back? You know, so ultimately, you know, we're just kind of like taking an everyday evaluation process of quality of each individual hop and how it's going to layer into the finished product. And sometimes when our beers go a little drift, I can kind of pinpoint it back to something that isn't quite shining the way that it should, or, you know, so
you'll layer some stuff in. Do you like stage in new stuff so that you can kind of track some of the variables as they happen? So you have a new, you know, crop year of a certain hop, and you'll just, you know, now tap into that new year of it, and then be able to taste it on, you know, a couple weeks later as it comes out, and be able to kind of track back. Or, you know, is it just a more broad process than that?
It's a little broader, but at the same time, like, we never change more than one variable pretty much at a time. Right. But we can kind of like get an idea of, you know, if the aromatics aren't where it needs to be, and if the evaluation of the hop isn't what it needs to be, and it's not really giving us that the true characteristic of the hop, whether it's a Chinook with, you know, pine, you know, grapefruit, you know, all those, you know, characteristics, then ultimately, you know, we just do one batch of it different, and then we let sensory kind of drive it from there. So it really is manipulating raw materials to put our best foot forward. It's not rocket science, but it really is, you know, having different levers to pull, and letting our sensory evaluation, push the beer in different directions.
Sure. I totally understand where you're going. It's also, I think, hard to think about the actual mechanism, especially at this scale at a production brewery, brewing 40 to 50,000 barrels in a year, of how that feedback loop happens, right? Because you now have to get it from that sensory folks, get that feedback, think about what could be causing that, think about all the different potential adjustments or solutions that you can make, decide on a course of action, implement that so that the next time that beer is brewed, that gets communicated correctly out there into that system. Like, I think you undersell just like what that process takes in order to kind of push it that way.
An amazing amount of moving parts that make that happen, and communication that has to make that happen. And really it is good product in and good product out. And when we won those back-to-back medals in 2023, that was post-COVID, and we ultimately decided not to go back to on-site selection. And
really, why not?
Well, maybe it was 22. Maybe it was Harvest 22. Anyway, right around that time, we decided, we were doing so good at like selecting as a team. So what I'm getting at is like we would, take our entire like event room and we would spread out all these hops and we would get the entire brew team to come together, and I'd make a first pass, and some of our other core people would make passes sensory wise, and then we'd all circle back around, and ultimately when we had 85% of the people saying this is the one, it makes a big difference than me and a couple people going out and rubbing hops, and you know what I mean. So to me, it gave me validation. And it gave me confidence. And
did you find that in that kind of scenario that sometimes the group might have varied from something that you may have picked by yourself, or
no? It was actually very, very linear, where everybody was like, "This is it." You know what I mean? So it gave great validity, and it's a little different than when we went out, last year and like. Did a blind evaluation, and we didn't know who grew what and this and that. And then we ended up with, a Citra that was 16.5 alpha, even after we selected it. And I'm like, the Citra's got a little hot burn, it's almost too much, So, there is something to be said about, that venting process of great hops and ultimately, great product in and great product out, and it's really what it's all about.
It's interesting to see, now obviously going to Yakima or going to the Pacific Northwest, and we say that here in America, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, going to the hop growers in Australia, New Zealand, if you're in Europe, going out to visit the growers and Hallertau, Tettnang, Saaz, the experience of that is invaluable, and everyone should do it and everyone should experience that. But over time, with enough experience, you get really good at what you need, and you dial that in, and it's less than about finding that, that perfect hop for the beer through that blind selection process. You can pretty much know what farm, what field, what hill you're going to, select from, because it's going to be pretty consistent once you find what you like. And so then that visit can just be more about the relationship and about, building that kind of connection, and less about the selection piece of it. But it's interesting to get the whole team involved, because you also get to see how other people experience that, and see even some of the language that they use around it, how they describe things. And, they might, in terms of the pure hedonics, like, dislike, they may like and dislike in the same kind of way, but they also may have a different kind of sensory approach to why they like or dislike that.
And we got to the point where we're buying more volume than one particular lot can sustain.
Right.
So we have to blend lots. So, then ultimately, you've got, a first and the second choice, and then is it a percentage of this and that? And so ultimately, we're taking 75% of this and 25% of this, and is this going to the hopback? Is this going to the kettle? Is this going to, to the dry hop? So those are all things that we're doing throughout the whole process. It's
so
literally,
you'll actually send certain lots into different stages.
we're tagging different. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not just homogenizing these lots into one,
No.
and then pelletizing as one blend. You're actually,
especially because we're a very hop forward brewery.
sure.
We when I say hop forward, a whole flower hop brewery. So we're using a lot of fresh
Sure.
flower hops, or not fresh, but whole flower. Whole flower. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Whole flower. Yeah.
What do you love about whole flower hops versus pelletized hops?
Well, I think a lot of it is just retaining the natural characteristics of the hop.
Yeah.
Pelletizing is kind of a violent process, in my opinion.
Sure.
The hammer mill.
They keep trying to make it less violent.
Well,
and
maybe
cool
but,
and less heat damage and all that stuff.
Yeah. But for us, it happened by accident in a sense. When we first bought the Trogs Brewery, back in 2011 or 12, when they expanded, it kind of fell on our plate. So they had a hopback, and then all of a sudden, we had this hopback. We didn't have any whole flower. So I would drive to, I would drive to Victory and Trogs, and I'd try to get these bales, and I'd bring them back, in my truck and all this stuff. And then ultimately one year, we ran fresh hop through it, and the fresh hop beers were sick. They were so good. Honestly, one of them might have won a medal. I don't remember. It was back in 14 or 15. And, our beers ultimately took a different level from that whole flowery post Whirlpool edition. And it's kind of stuck with our brand ever since.
That's really interesting. What do you, if you think about it in terms of, character of the beer, what do you think, how would you describe what that whole flower adds versus using pellets? Is it, I've talked a lot about the texture over the last few weeks that hops impart, because I think, we think about the flavor and bitterness. We don't think about some of that texture, but that texture is an important piece. And, within that scope of the whole flower, you have that, and you also have this other, element that happens where, extraction within that whole flower is actually a little bit harder, than it is potentially within that pellet. But some of that means that, it does that soften some of that character, or, somehow, take an edge off of it. How do you think about the character that whole flower imparts?
Well, I think it definitely adds a nice, soft, resiny, flowery kind of aroma. And in our hopback, not all the work goes through it. Only a portion of it goes through it. There's a strategic approach that we have as far as, not too vegetable, not too hot, so maybe not the best as far as utilization, but at the same time, we're getting what I would call a really bright essential oil of essential oils and some alpha acids. And so, it really is one of those things that, makes our beers stand out, in my opinion. I don't know if it's, what's making us cross the stage at time to time. But I do know that I like the flavor of it, and I like the results, and it's something that is unique to us, and we'll continue to do it.
Let's talk about that kind of setup of the brew house, and the way that it's designed, that pushes then a lot of that hot side hop addition through that hop back. I should say you're adding hops on the hot side throughout that kind of, throughout that, in order to build layer and depth. Explain that to me, how you go about that.
Well, just to be clear, so the wort gets chilled from the kettle to the Whirlpool, right?
Right.
And we're always heavy on Whirlpool additions.
Okay.
Yeah. So that wort that's going to hit that whirlpool is probably at 185. So we're trying to, and
So
a
you're
lot of that,
pooling then.
is that what it's called? I don't know.
That's the word that the kids are using these days, Matt.
Okay. Well, it's happening in an inline tube and shell heat exchanger.
Sure.
And this happened back in 2018. So I'm pretty sure that we were leaps and bounds ahead of what the hell they're talking about. So
we can thank Hazy IPA for this, by the way, because
no, please.
Yes, no, Hazy IPA with that trying to reduce the isomerization, led to that lowering whirlpool temperatures in order to Anyway, So you're still doing a bunch of whirlpool, and then and you're doing that obviously with pellet hops, I assume.
Yes, but some of that stuff is obviously concentrated.
Okay,
not pourable, but cryo basically.
Sure.
Yeah, and then so that wort resides at a lower temperature. We steep for a period, and some of it goes into the hopback, some of it doesn't.
And this is you have a big system. So when you say it takes a little bit of time. You're brewing 68 barrels in a batch.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Whirlpooling will take a little while in that kind of scale.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then you divert some of that then through the hopback on whole leaf hops in order to pick up some of that character.
Yep. Exactly.
Cool. How do you make how do you think about that? I wouldn't even know where to start. I want to, shape this much character through that. How much does does that hopback then pull? And is that going through at the whirlpool temperature and then circling back into that? Or tell me, how does that work?
No, so it's ultimately we're gonna do maybe there's a period of rest that's going to happen on the whirlpool. Then a portion of the wort is going to go through the hopback. So it's not
before
all of
it's
it.
chilled.
Yes.
Right.
So there's a period of some of it is going to steep. An agitator in there is going to whip it up. It's going to make almost like a hop concentrate to a certain level. And then it's ultimately going to get pushed through the heat exchanger in line to the yeast propagator and on its way to the fermenter. So yeah, a lot of it is time. We can manipulate time, temperature, agitation,
right?
A lot of various things that we can manipulate.
That is a lot more control than as I think about the Blickman hop rocket for a home brewer. That kind of hop back where it flows through and it's very generally a short contact, and then you knock the entire batch out over this as it flows. And of course, if you're in a 5 or 10 gallon batch, that happens really fast and there's not a lot of contact there. Right. And so thinking about this giant vessel, being able to do that, being able to, hold much more volume of liquid and do a more saturated, kind of steeping on those whole cone hops. Anyway, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. It's pretty cool.
Well, I do think that, whole flower hops have an amazing ability to, retain their natural characteristics. And, that's something that, I think we'll continue to incorporate into our beers, So, and we're very strategic about maybe not we don't buy too many whole flower hops. We keep that pretty because nobody really, besides us and a handful of breweries, nobody wants whole flower hops if we're long on the tooth on them. So we really do try to find a way, and we put them in mini bales, so we put them in the tiny little Mylar bales,
okay,
so that we can keep them super fresh, and our recipes are X amount of batches go through, and so. We're not like in England where there's a big old, bale of them sitting out getting oxidized. We're very strategic about how we introduce our whole flower hops.
Are there some varieties that you like better in whole flower than others? I could see you mentioned Chinook, and I it sounds like that hop plays a good part in it. Do some of these work better as whole flower than say a Citra or Mosaic?
Well, for us, it's.
Are we going to get into proproprietary land here?
There's no proprietary land. It's Simcoe, Citra, Mosaic for the most part.
Yeah, cool.
It really is. You know, and Chinook. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But are all those, you work with all of those in whole flower, or there's some that you just like better in whole flower than in pellet?
We use a little bit of like sultana in whole flower, and we've used some Eldorado, but Simcoe Citra Mosaic is, the peanut butter of whole flower.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
What you mentioned earlier that, within a lot of a hop that you've selected, that some lots might be better, in different kinds of places, whether that's hot side or whirlpool or hopback or then dry hop. What are, when you think about like what would make a certain lot better for one of those things, what would some of those criteria be? I'm curious about that.
That's such a moving target.
Sure. Is there just like a fruity character that might be better in a dry hop, or
as an agricultural product, it's just it's constantly changing. So I really couldn't tell you from one lot to the next, or one year to the next, or this and that. I mean, we are buying some fresh harvest hops from Top Hops in Michigan, and I think that they're growing some really good Chinook, so I'm excited.
Michigan Chinook. Okay.
Michigan Chinook, it might be a little underrated. We'll see how the beers come out, but I really think it's that's one hop that I think can rival, a lot of different hops around the country.
That's cool. And I know that, in fact, our timing for this episode has been, we've had to work around the fresh hops that you have coming from Michigan, because it's that time, for the best time of the year, fresh hop time. Well, let's, I want to talk a little bit about, this kind of contrast and how you all think about West Coast IPA versus American IPA. Obviously, it's something we wrote about in the magazine and something you talked to us about before, and you make both of these things. And so I'm curious to get that kind of perspective on it. Before we do that, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroirs, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling, thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short, let's make it flavorful. And Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropic strains make a tropical bouquet, reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off of your first order. And if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Hosted by Sydney Jones of Heaven Hill in Bardstown, Kentucky, and Molly Troop, master distiller for Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon. This podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes and give it a listen. All right, Matt, let's talk about American IPA versus West Coast IPA. Where do we start on this? How do you think about it? Because you make both.
Well, I'm not sure I actually knew much about it until about 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know. Like Lean and Mean, in like late editions. And, I don't, my buddy Tyler from Barley Browns always was into like, the lighter, all Pilsner malt base and, Breakside and all those guys, they were doing it, and I love it, but I didn't know much about it, and then, I guess some of it can be credited to Southern California and things like that. But ultimately, it's kind of new to us as a whole, which is okay.
But these are in some, I'm going to say it but it's cliche, like shades of difference. They're not that far off. When I look at Headhunter, it's got a little bit more color, not a ton, but just a little bit more color. And, and maybe like just a touch more. I mean, just a little bit extra, sweetness in the sip, but not much. Like it's still. I mean, again, just very, very small shades of difference. Maybe the hop character, is a bit more robust even in the American IPA. It almost feels fuller, and that there's also maybe a little more like oily, resinous kind of character in it that feels it adds some to that mouthfeel versus that hyper lean West Coast kind of approach. How do you think about that?
I really think that there's a leanness of the West Coast that struggles to have the body to be able to make it so that it's not a little like grassy and a little raw and a little like unrefined, like I really like a little bit more malt character in my IPAs. Now, don't get me wrong, like, as you lower the gravity and, it still has that bright citrus component to it, with that West Coast. But to me, they become a little flabby in a lot of ways. And I guess I'm maybe a West Coast guy, through heart and heart, or an American style IPA guy, but I really have.
You can handle a little bit of that bitterness, and yeah.
Well, I like the bitterness, but I also like the leanness and of a West Coast. But it also becomes to me a little more sharp, a little more rancid fruitiness. I hate to say that. Just a little bit more.
We use that description, but it's
raw. It's a little more raw. That is hard to pull the malt to bring all that together. And I might be wrong, but I keep trying to, love them as much as I love West Coast, or American style IPA. And, well, not West Coast, but it's becoming overlapping to a certain level, isn't it?
All of these things were overlapping, and I think that a certain kind of pedantic West Coast brewer has now insisted that we separate out the idea of American IPA from West Coast IPA, even though what American IPA had completely evolved into what it's just that West Coast IPA kind of continued to evolve down this other channel over the last few years, and now we have separate categories in the competitions for it, just to reflect those things in the same way that we now have separate categories for like New Zealand, and Australian IPAs. Even though the crossover between those and these West Coast IPAs is just, there's so much overlap. And anyway, there's some absurdity, I think, going on, and some of this over categorization within the kind of competitive side of IPA making, which is, I'll allow it only because there's so many beers in all these categories already that, okay, we can kind of divide that out. Well, how do you, in terms of hops, how does West Coast IPA feel different for you than American IPA?
I kind of think maybe a little less bitterness.
Sure.
As far as our kettle editions go, maybe a little more tail end heavy.
And it's not less bitterness with more sweetness. It's less bitterness with more lightness.
Well, you're gonna have less sweetness because I don't think you have the crystal malt, right? In the grain.
Well, I'm saying it's not less bitter because there's more sweetness balancing. It's less bitter because there's a lot less bitterness in it,
for sure,
even with the light body.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Less kettle addition early on, I guess.
Right.
Yep. And then then we go really heavy towards the tail end, which is pretty much like nothing in the middle, where a headhunter would have a 45 and a 20-minute edition, a nice, good, medium edition charge. For us, it's, Centennial Simcoe, both those editions. And then
all hops that work equally well in West Coast IPA these days, too.
Sure, yeah. Yep. And then we hit it hard.
Unless you're Evan, which, can't use Centennial then. Sorry, that's an inside joke.
No, I know. Evan hates Centennial.
Yeah.
And we only use it in extract form for that reason.
Oh, interesting.
So we love Centennial, but we only use it in extract form. So there you go, Evan.
What's the difference between extract form and?
It's much more. It's much more stable.
Okay. Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of we're heavy on the tail end. I think the biggest thing is probably goes through the hopback. It's a Whirlpool edition. Goes through all those stages. We do a double. We do a primary a dry hop. In our West Coast, and then a secondary dry hop after the first dry hop. So 2 dry hops,
A 2-stage dry hop.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
pretty.
double dry hopped.
I guess that's the biggest thing in a lot of ways. Less medium hop additions, leaner malt, drier, crisper, cleaner. But still late heavy. With 2 dry hops.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, before we stop talking about IPA, because I do want to pivot and talk about some German style stuff, which is close to your heart. Not that IPAs are not. Obviously, you love the IPAs that you make too. But before we hop off of this topic, what a terrible pun right there. What do you think? What do you think is such a difference maker? Now, you guys just absolutely crush it in competition. There with whether it's our blind judges at Craft Beer and Brewing, that gave Headhunter a Beer of the Year award last year, whether it's GABF and World Beer Cup judges, over and over again, like there's a excellence to the beers that you make, and a truly incredible a kind of piece that just creates this that allows them within this kind of competitive space to rise above the fray. If you think about it in these kind of broad terms, what do you think 2 or 3 of the key things are for the way that you go about making these that make the difference in your beers?
Oh, that's not fair.
I know. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask on the behalf of brewers out there.
That's okay. Before you know it, we'll be stagnant. We won't win anything. I think
I'm not going to jinx you. I promise.
Well, we do have 3 locations, so that helps. So we get to play the numbers, and I think that's important, right? Anytime you play the numbers, right? We can enter 15 beers instead of 5. That helps.
So you enter 3 versions of the same beer in the same category, and one of them's going to win.
No, not. I think. No, I do think we have our hop forward beers can rival pretty much anything in the country. Packaging has been a big part of our success. Meaning the Headhunters that have won, in 23. The total packaging is. Oxygen has been, in the lower teens. So that's a testament to everything from hot side to cold side to, everything in between.
And that's true TPO and not shaken.
No. So, and it's
There's
funny
a
that you
difference,
asked
and
me
everyone
that
should
because
look that up.
I was blown away years ago when Firestone Walker would win with Union Jack. And it would come out of their big brewery, and I'm like, how does this brewery win with these huge batches of beer? And ultimately, it started with raw materials, quality processing, and ultimately, a product that was going to be, wicked good after 3 or 4 weeks after it was packaged, and that's kind of what it boils down to is. It really is a testament to, good processing.
And that is, especially in these hoppy categories at the major competitions, that's a big piece of it. It's a packaging competition. It's a brewing competition, and it's a packaging competition. And you have to be really good at that packaging. And do you do anything special with that packaging for your competition stuff? Or now are we getting into some of the deep secrets?
No, I mean, we do some things like on the smaller side, for some antioxidants and other things like that. But I mean, the core of our awards have come from a manufacturing facility, and we just, we take it off the line, we pull it, and away we go. So, it's not rocket science. I mean, we're not a huge brewery, we're not a small brewery, but we happen to make some of the best wheat beers and hoppy beers in the world.
For sure, for sure. Speaking of those wheat beers, maybe we should talk about those for a little while. Weissbier, wheat beer, maybe not as popular of a craft beer style as it once was. I mean, if I think back to my mid 90s entree into craft beer, wheat beer was everywhere. It was a big piece of what craft was, maybe much more so than it is now. And in fact, you make a blueberry wheat beer that you still make to this day, which also reminds me of that very early era of craft in the 90s, because it seemed like everybody made a blueberry or a raspberry or some sort of fruited wheat beer at that point. And now, of course, now we just make straight up kettle sours with the fruit puree, and you give brewers a tool, and next thing you know, they're just going to sledgehammer it into submission and go as big as they possibly can, because this is what it's craft beer, but that's that first phase, right? You go as big as you can, and then you figure out how to turn it back into something that people want to drink regularly. So what is talk to me about your approach to wheat beer. Gogglefogger, another award-winning beer that you make, and you just poured some for me, and we drank some earlier, or we drank some Weissbier earlier. Talk to me about this approach. It's not something we talked much about on the podcast here. Did talk about it last year with a brewer up in Michigan. Obviously Weissbier, it's still a very classic German style, even though it's not the coolest amongst American brewers in the same way that, say Pilsner or Helles might be these days.
Well, I've always had a love affair with German Weissbier. So, when we first started planning our brewery here, the newer production brewery in 2018, my idea was to maybe try to replicate some of the Bavarian style Weissbier breweries by, having these open fermenters and, integrating, some of the yeast propagation and things like that. And that's what we did, So our wheat beer before 2018 was, in my opinion, really sulfury. Oh gosh, I mean, we didn't sell a lot of it. It wasn't the most pleasant thing in the world. I felt like the esters weren't very complex. And so anyway, when we built the new brewery and invested a lot of money into some open fermenters in a nice closed clean room, with our yeast propagators and a flotation tank, pretty early on, I realized that, wow, this is a good investment. And like our Weizen beers have taken on a new character due to the fact that they've got this, open atmospheric, fermentation that's happening, and the mid-level phenolics of bubblegum and banana and clove and nutmeg. And it's not just, clove and banana or bubblegum and banana. It really has a wide range of phenolics. So that's kind of where, we realize that, this is something that, just like it was intended to, it reduced sulfur, it softened up a lot of things. And so, that's where it all started. And we don't sell a lot of it, as far as we make it about, a couple batches a month, and it's a very small, it doesn't pay bills per se, as far as this is a driving force of our business, but it's something that we're passionate about, and we really do love
tell me about this. I'm curious, when I think about open fermentation, I also think that, tank geometry feeds into some of this, especially with that kind of ester and, phenol production. Your open fermenter, for wheat beer is actually pretty tall, maybe much taller than I would, than a lot of other open fermenters. And so it has the geometry is not that kind of, one
It's
to
not
one.
a one-to-one. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good eye. I like the fact that you notice that.
Yeah, I pay attention to these things, Matt.
You do. Yeah, very good. Yeah, so, one thing that we do that's a little different is our wheat beer goes into a flotation tank. So
what does the flotation tank do?
Flotation tank basically is, it's a great tool that German brewers have to ultimately remove some cold trub. They nucleation sites of oxygen will like carry some of those heavy, proteins and polyphenols and things like that to the top of the tank, and then we can pump out from underneath it, and you ultimately are left with a little cleaner wort. Super dynamic for really heavily hop beers or pilsners and things like that. But for us, we tried
you can think about it almost like if it were an open fermentation of helping take off some of that kind of, scuzzy, darker matter that hits that top of the crowns and on the tank. And it just does it within the kind of liquid form of that.
Absolutely. So it's basically a separation tool that happens that, can really make a more crisp, clean, brighter finished product. So ultimately, as we pump from behind, and leave that behind before it goes in the open fermenter, we leave a lot of those like dirty, trub and some of that cold break that maybe isn't super desirable. And some of that stuff will ultimately make its way back onto the top of the Kreuzen head of the fermenter, and then we'll skim that again. So we're ultimately just cleaning and cleaning and cleaning that fermenting beer or wort, or ultimately to get a super bright beer that's focused on bubblegum, banana, clove, and for us it's a little white pepper, it's a little nutmeg, it's a little all those things that are those nuances that take it to another level. So
what do you think, walk me through this. Like, how do you, where did you start writing a recipe for weissbier? What was your inspiration? And, how'd you go about trying to, capture this idea? Because when we think about it, I know that, I talked to lots of American brewers, like, I want to make this perfect weissbier. I'm like, well, there's no perfect weissbier in Bavaria. There's lots of different weissbiers. There's lots of different things that you could reference, and so you as a brewer start making aesthetic choices. Like, well, I like this from this and this from this and this part of this one. And like, how do I start to synthesize those into a beer that's going to be the beer that I want to make? How do you, talk to me about that creative process?
Well, that creative process started when I was in my early 20s, and I got exposed to Baltimore Brewing Company. And Baltimore Brewing Company probably made one of the best, not only pilsners, but Weizen beers and that I've ever had. So it was and I got a chance to work there for a year as an internship. And so Theo de Gruen, which was, Theo de Gruen is a Dutch brewmaster. I literally like they made the best wheat beer in the world, and they made the best pilsner that I've ever had in the world. And ultimately, that exposure and that whole process of flotation, aeration, open fermentation stuck with me. And that's kind of where it all came from. Like, I know this process makes the best Weizen beer in the world. How can we do that? So that's really where it came from, is Baltimore Brewing Company.
So then, as you start, thinking about, the ingredients and fermentation in your own Weissbier, where'd you go from there?
Well, I really don't think. I mean, we let process kind of do its thing, and
Process more important than recipe.
well, recipe's pretty simple, right? For I mean, a little Weizen, little wheat, a little pills, a little. One thing we have done over the years is, in my travels to Germany, we did add a little bit of Cara wheat, which is a darker wheat. So our Weizen beer has definitely come a little darker. That's something that I think has definitely changed a little bit. But as a whole, we really let the process of open fermentation and letting, the sulfur and all those things escape, and, let the metabolic pathway of the yeast create its energy naturally, not through, through free rise. And it can be pretty predictable, and it also at times has been kind of tough. So, it's been one of those things that we never designed our brewery to be a weissbier brewery and make money. We designed a brewery to make weissbier world class.
Money be damned.
Yep. Yeah.
So what does that mean in terms of like real practice? Because if you were designing it to make money, you would have, had the shortest production time and closed tanks.
It's the consumer that really, the consumer really, doesn't have a super love affair with Weizen beer, no matter how good it is or this and that. And I think we'd probably sell more of it if we made it more of a shandy and put lemonade into it, but that's not a path we're going to cross. So ultimately, we make the best wheat beer we can. We win some awards along the way, and I love drinking it, and that's okay.
You make it sound so simple, Matt.
It's a love affair with a lot of people in our building, and it's challenging and it's cool.
For sure. Let's talk about one more beer that's close to your heart.
I mean, in today's world, everything is moving, and like it's becoming a little more challenging. It's becoming more alchemy. It's becoming a little more food science. Which is okay. It's challenging. For me, I'm drinking a little bit less. I love THC products.
Really?
I'm kind of been experimenting with, kind of figuring out how our brewery can find that next, THC product that, might be cool and delicious and stand out in a crowd. And I don't know. I mean, to me, that's probably, a path that I'm trying to navigate from an alchemy standpoint, and something that, I mean, I've been doing this for 32 years, brewing and craft beer. It's a long time. It's hard on your body, things like that. So ultimately, it's important for me to, stay engaged and not, fall back on my laurels and things like that. So, staying on the forefront of things that are cool and innovative and creative and flow with consumer demands, is something that I want to continue to embrace. And so I'm trying all these things, knowing that, it's a moving target, but it's a little different than just, barley malt, hops malt, so that's kind of where I'm at.
You could have just said Rauch beer and I would have been totally happy with that answer, but no, I'm just kidding. Maybe we kind of pull it up into a big picture question as we finish up here, Matt. 30 some odd years of brewing, you've watched beer go through a whole lot of phases. I've watched it go through a whole lot of phases in my experience, not brewing beer, but drinking beer and consuming beer. And of course, the last decade of craft beer and brewing here. What excites you the most now? What are you most what are you most concerned about? And then again, what continues to drive you with that kind of excitement? And I think you probably answered a little bit of that second question already. But
No, I don't think THC excites me. I think, and there's a lot of non-alcoholic actually is one of those things too, where, dealcoholization is something I'm taking a really serious hard look at.
Heck yeah.
So, all of those things, like if you don't shift and pivot and really understand where you're headed and, how you can ultimately adjust to the consumer, you're going to get left in the dust, So, for me, we keep doing what we're doing and, putting the best foot forward as far as core, raw materials and things like that. Crush has been a cool, new hop addition.
Sure.
Things like
586,
that.
now Crush.
Yeah, 586. So, I really can't say that, there's one thing that's got me super excited about, being in the craft beer industry. Right now, for us, it's, making the best beer we know how to. Innovating is the best we know how to, and creating teams, that can create the best beer. So, it's hard for me to say, okay, this is what we're going to get excited about. It's the same shit we've gotten excited about for the last 10 or 15 years.
Right.
It really is about, good products, good relationships, and ultimately, being the best that you can deliver.
That is a great place to bring it to a close. Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. ProBrew offers 2 to 4 week lead time on in-stock rotary can fillers and seamers. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast Daybreak 5 gives you juicy modern hop flavors without the haze. Take back control of your canning and seaming with the experts at RSS Macklin. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. Visit breweryworkshop.com for more information about the upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September. And if you're a distiller or curious about it, check out the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. Help support us in bringing great conversations, great magazine issues, all of the stuff that we make, great video classes, everything else that we produce and bring specifically to you. We depend on your support. In fact, subscribers are the lifeblood of our ability to bring this to you. So please go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, and subscribe to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Matt, if people want to learn more about Fatheads and all of the amazing award-winning beers that you make here, where do they find you all in real life and out there on the internet?
Just fatheads.com. Yeah. Come visit us. We're always evolving and trying to get better. And, we love hoppy beer. We love wheat beer. We love lager beer. We love all beer. We love people. Come visit us.
Phenomenal beers, obviously, and not just as named by the editors of Craft Beer and Brewing, but also by blind judging all across the major competitions, continually crushing it, and also continuing to stay on top of the game by taking a strategic and creative approach. Matt, it's been fun to pick your brewing brain, talk to you about these things. I appreciate it. Cheers.
It's been a real honor. Thank you.
Thanks. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.